to make this important? And why didn't it happen? Was it simply Washington's insistence that NATO should be the main security body? Why didn't the Europeans argue more strongly for their own position? What we really needed after the end of the Cold War was a genuine pan-European, a continental system of security all the way from Lisbon to Vladivostok. Not anti-American, of course, but post-American. Was there a chance, and why did it fail?
We worked very seriously on this issue after Helsinki Charter has been signed in 1975 and then Paris document in 1990. We were a bit naive. We were certain that we can establish partnerships with NATO and European Union. Participation in NATO will change the nature of NATO, and that was the main argument of the United States when they declined this hypothetical proposal that we can be, although we never believed into that. Primakov, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, he initially was certain that the only thing that it can do is just to put us in the queue for a very long time. In the 90s, we were coming closer in that sense with the Americans, and it was intensive years of cooperation with the institutions as well. But first shock was, of course, the bombardment of Belgrade. The second shock was war in Iraq, 2003. And after that, we started to understand that our interests, they are not going like that, but they are going started to decline.
So the problem was the failure to institutionalize that relationship with NATO. You have the 1997 Permanent Joint Accords and 2002 the NATO-Russia Council. But all of this was, in a sense, a way of keeping Russia quiet. We needed an institutional, structural change at the end of the Cold War, and this didn't happen. All that happened effectively was the expansion of the institutions of the political West, NATO, OSCE, as you say, basically gutted of its transformative potential. And instead of which, Russia was left, out with its own vision of how the post-Cold War security order should look like. Meanwhile, the political West establishes it on the framework of what you could call hegemonic internationalism or democratic internationalism, its own vision of how the world should be organized. Everybody in Moscow understood the security dilemma when Vladimir Putin came in the year 2000. One of the first things he did was try to solve this dilemma. He said, he spoke with Bill Clinton, and he's mentioned this a few times, we have to sort this out. Can Russia, if not join, some sort of substantive partnership? And when NATO was enlarging in the 1990s, when it first enlarged, even Zbigniew Brzezinski, the famous grand chessboard man, said, of course, he was a partisan, very passionate in favor of NATO enlargement. But even he, in 1997, in his grand chessboard book, said, of course, we need an overarching security framework with Russia. And also William Burns, who's now head of CIA, who was the ambassador, US ambassador to Moscow as well, who understood the things in those days, said there has to be this framework. Ultimately, yes, naivety. Was there a way in which some sort of, you could have broken the logjam, if you like, on institutional change to actually transform European security? Because ultimately, we began with the war and the conflict over Ukraine. Ultimately, we have identified for 30 years there was an issue and the failure to resolve it. So was it naivety or was it structural?
Initially, as you know, the whole idea on which NATO was based is to keep Germans down, US in, and Russia out.
Soviet Union out.
Soviet Union at that time. We have created with NATO agreements, a number of participation in certain committees in which we can do things together. But all this was not central to NATO activity. Ecology, conversion of war industry into civilian industry, some exercises, terrorism and all that things, but the central thing is planning of resources or military plans. We will never have been brought in. You know that in NATO everything has been mostly decided by Big Four. It is US, UK, France and Germany. On the surface, NATO-Russia Council, of course, was a good thing, but it was still on the periphery of the major NATO activity. The issue was when Americans put themselves a question, what is NATO? Is it a conference hall or a military alliance? But the choice was for a military alliance. And military alliance against whom? Against us, since we did started to get out of this influence and we started to understand more and more that this partnership is in vain